This is our tree of traits. And so with this diagram, and granted it doesn't look like a tree, it probably looks more like a plant or a spaceship or I don't know what, but when I say tree, I mean it is a decision tree, meaning that we can follow the grid or the diagram or the paths to navigate around, to navigate how we manage our emotions and our traits. So if you recall, the first group of traits that we went over, determination, tenacity, and resilience, remember I said that you can refer to those as grit. That word just describes the function or the mechanism of all three of these traits. And so on the left-hand side, all three traits are grouped together. And they're grouped together in the column of grit. Now, follow me over to the right-hand column that's labeled grace. And in the grace column, we have three more traits. And those traits are empathy, appreciation, and motivational. Now, why these three are grouped together in the grace column is because they are more interpersonal. They are about relationships, right? When you're empathetic of others, and when you're appreciative, you can be appreciative of events and things and possessions, but mostly it would be people. And then motivational, right? We're going to motivate others and motivate people. So on the right-hand column, we've labeled that grace, meaning that these are the traits which deal well with people, typically. And then on the left-hand side, we've got our grit traits, tenacity, right, determination, and grit. And then in the middle are those other traits that we've discussed, beginning at the bottom of the middle column, which is self-awareness, and then above that, emotional intelligence, which is what we are doing right here or developing right here. And then after we go through this little presentation, I'm going to close it out on emotional intelligence. And then above that, authenticity, and then above that, creativity. Now, you see these little arrows. I'm going to explain it to you, hopefully very clearly, so that you know what you're looking at here and what you have here. And this is a roadmap, right? This is a roadmap for recovery. This is redefining recovery based upon yourself, based upon your individualized strengths and weaknesses, and it shows you how to navigate from one trait to the next. Now, your trait assessment, in which you received the results of which trait ranks the highest in your life, with that you can apply that to this tree of traits to kind of show you where you're prone to go down, what path you're prone to go down. So that's just a general overview. Now we're going to talk in detail about how we can use this tree of traits in our life to keep us on course, to keep us focused. And so the pattern of the universe, right? The pattern of our lives, our human bodies, and that in nature, even in weather systems, is always to seek and obtain homeostasis. And what homeostasis is it's balance, right? And so in our lives, we are always seeking balance. And if you'll just think for a moment, think through this, anytime that the pendulum swings to one direction, to the extreme, it will swing back. Maybe you guys have done this before in a science class, or you've been to the mall and they sell those neat little I don't know what, I don't think they're toys, but or figurines. They're just something there that they've got the little steel silver balls on them, and they're hanging down from strings, right? I really should probably have one here with me to show you, but I know you're imaginative and creative, so you can visualize what I'm describing here. But if you take one of those little circular things and you drop it, the energy from that thing will transfer through all the other balls there, and then the last little ball will swing up and then back. Or think of a clock, right? A grandfather clock. The hand is always swinging, right? It's a pendulum. So what that's doing, all it's suggesting and proving is that we, even in nature and gravity, always seek balance, right? We always seek balance. Our bodies are always seeking balance, right? And so whatever you put in your body, there will be an equal and opposite reaction, meaning that if you overload your body with certain vitamins, your body will expel them or try to bring it back to balance. And so there's a lot of examples of life, of nature, of human beings, of our world, always seeking stability and balance and centeredness. And if you'll think back for a moment in your active using days, probably you weren't very balanced. I was not. I was completely not balanced. I would chase the latest, greatest, what I thought to be idea, and it would lead me off a cliff, metaphorically and also literally. I did actually one time drive my car off of an embankment, but that's another story. So anyway, we are prone to really going to the extreme, right? And that's what we do. We go all out. And so what we're left with is just we are absolutely in active addiction. We are rarely balanced and level-headed and clear, centered. No, we're being pulled away. Obviously, it's easy to point to the chemicals, to the drugs that's pulling us away. And that's true, but we are allowing our entire selves to be pulled in certain directions where if we were self-aware, we would not allow that. We would just look upon it, right? We would not go chasing after those desires or those things that so easily distract us. I was going to say don't go chasing waterfalls, but I may be dating myself there with a little TLC reference. But anyway, so on the left-hand side, you've got grit, right? And so the way that this map works, this is a concept map. And if you're taking notes, and I'll upload this to the website so that you can pull it down, it would be good if you can keep a copy of this with you. The facilitator there perhaps could print off a copy for each of you, or if you're at home, you could print it off and stick it up. But here's what we're going to do with it. Okay. So in recovery, the same thing holds true. We want to achieve balance and we want to sustain balance. We want centeredness, right? We don't want to be too far, as they say, out in left field, and what will happen, or out in right field, doesn't matter. In recovery, we can follow our traits into some bad places. Let me explain. So I probably land really strongly on the grit column. Being an athlete in high school and in college, being the youngest of four boys. I have three older brothers. I was always competing, trying to get attention or to earn recognition. And I know I'm not the only one that's done that, but for whatever reason, my environment, my nature, or nurture, both have developed or created or aided me to be a person who's competitive, who likes to achieve, right? And my desire to achieve isn't always pure, right? There's selfish motivation there. There has been. I'm just speaking honestly. Over the course of my life, I would compete, try to achieve, try to make myself known, right? Try to feel like I've earned respect. And so I would just go all out, right? And I did it in active addiction, and I do it in recovery. But I have learned to pull back from that through the awareness of what you're looking at right here, through these traits, right? So let's say, I'll give you another specific example. This trait-based model of recovery. I've been working on this for 5 years, and as you're watching this right here, right now, this is kind of the climax, the conclusion. At least it's actually a start of something new, but this is finally getting all of these ideas and this research and this writing and the observations kind of distilled down into a product or a service that you can access. And so this is my life's work, and it's not just my life's work, it's what a lot of other people have experienced and seen, and I'm just kind of putting it together. Well, I have a deadline, a goal that I had set to have this entire model completed, and it was a very ambitious goal. And I shared that goal in front of a national audience at a national conference. And so right after, this was actually, I'll go ahead and tell you, it was in April. It was at the RX Summit in Atlanta. And I presented this model, myself and a co-presenter. And during the Q&A, someone asked, when will this thing be done? When can we get it? When can we implement it? And at the time when they asked the question, I hadn't even imagined when it would be done. But I didn't think that would be a good response. So I, like most of you would have done, the leaders that you are, I said 90 days. And so that was on April 12th. Today is something like June the 15th. And so July the 12th will be 90 days, all right? I'm hitting hard on those grit column traits. So I left Atlanta and come back to Kentucky, started working on this and putting everything together, and I had a deadline to hit, and I set my mind to it, and I started out with the project, and I used my traits, right, to get the thing to come together, to get it to come into fruition, to something that was actually tangible that you could touch. And so I'm firing strongly on the grit column using my trait of determination primarily. I would not be distracted or detoured. I have to get this model done, right? I have to get it done. And it became the paramount or the primary purpose of my life, it felt like, and which is really over projecting what it really is. Of course, it's very powerful and transformative, but what it led me to was a place of where I was no longer having fun doing it. And this isn't over a long period of time. I noticed it 1 week over a period of a couple days. I was getting agitated. I was getting frustrated. It seemed like, couldn't depend on other people. And so I began to just kind of, you get what I'm saying. I was clenching up. I wanted to get this thing done, and I wanted to get it on time, and wanted it to be great. And so I was using my trait of determination, but I noticed, and my wife noticed, that I had lost my joy on the project, and that if I continued in that fashion, her and I talked, and I realized if I continued going in 12, 15, 18 hours a day working on the model just with the pure focus of getting it completed, getting it distributed, getting it launched, getting it implemented, that not only would I be exhausted, but I would have been doing it in the wrong spirit, so to speak, with the wrong attitude, with the wrong approach, because this trait-based model of recovery has got to be done in love. It's got to be done in joy or with joy, right? If you're not having fun doing something, then we really need to check and see why we're doing it. Maybe we're doing the right thing. We've just lost the purpose or the meaning or the motivation behind it. And so I realized that. It was after, I think, maybe a Thursday night. I was like, you know what? Amanda is right. I've been using my trait of determination to get this thing implemented, developed and implemented, but I've lost my joy. I've lost that connotation and that spirit and that saturation of love. And I might as well not even do it, right? And so now look at the determination trait that's on the grit column there on your left. What I was able to do was to take a step back. And it took actually probably 2 days before I realized that I was all out, entrenched within, and locked up within the grit column, right? I couldn't see it at the time, but my wife could, and I listened to her. And when I heard her, I said, something's got to change. So what I did, I meditated. Remember that, and I encourage you to do the same, to incorporate a practice of meditation at least twice a day, in the morning and the evening. And what I done was meditated for probably an hour. And we don't meditate to become good meditators. That's not the purpose of meditation. I'll talk a little bit more about that a little later, but I was able, through self-awareness, to take a step back, right? I began to see that I was really hitting heavily upon my collective grit traits, which those traits can serve us well, but when we go all out in one direction, we can use our traits, even though they have both good and bad expressions, right? When we are locked up within them and we can't see around to our other traits, to the other parts of us, and when we cannot see others, when we cannot see the big picture, when we are caught up in pretty toxic thought patterns, right? And maybe even the behavioral patterns. In recovery, we've got to pay attention to this. I have to pay attention to this. If I don't, I'm that close to a relapse because I'm trying to white knuckle it. I'm trying to white knuckle this project. I'm trying to, with all the tenacity I have, get this thing up and running. And that's the wrong heart, the wrong spirit to do this thing. And in fact, it's the wrong heart or spirit to do most everything. And so through this trait of self-awareness, I was able to reassess, to step back, take a breath, take a deep breath, and just let those things go, right? The necessity of getting the project done, my standards of quality, the timeliness of it all, the unanswered questions that I had to just one night, meditating before I went to bed, just consciously, intentionally letting that go. And it immediately brought me back to this place of peace, to this place of rest and restoration. I was able to see more clearly. And I was able to see through self-awareness that I had lost or shortchanged some of the behaviors of those grace-based traits. Empathy and appreciation primarily. I had lost my appreciation and my gratitude at even having an opportunity to put something like this together. I had went so hard to the left in determination and tenacity that I had left the firm foundation of appreciation. And so I was shortchanging the traits of grace. So, back through self awareness, I realized that and I said, okay, I've veered off course. And so now I come back through self awareness to that place of balance, to that place of centeredness. Now, if you'll notice, each one of these traits have an arrow down to self-awareness. From determination, tenacity, resilience, they all go to self-awareness. Same thing for the right-hand side. Empathy and appreciation and being motivational. They all come down to self-awareness, which is at the bottom of the balance column. Here's why. No matter where you find yourself, no matter where you find that you've drifted off the path of balance and centeredness into one of these columns or these traits, anytime that we see that we have veered off course, we can quickly come back through self-awareness, right? And so that self-awareness can be just a momentary reminder that, oh, I have gotten off course. And what we can do is bring ourselves back and if we can take 20 to 30 seconds even, to realize that we are caught up in all the drama, or we're caught up in all of our efforts, or we're caught up, right, in this or that. When we realize that we've lost our footing, lost our foundation, our connection to our presence, right? We can. There's always, remember this if you're taking notes, there's always a path back home. There is always a path back home. And that path will always go through self-awareness. You cannot control or change or modify anything unless you are aware that you're doing it, aware with intentionality that that's who you are or what you want to cultivate in your life. Like this path to centeredness and balance, this path to home begins with self-awareness. All right, so what we're able to do is anytime we find ourselves drifting too much, out of proportion, out of balance into any of these traits, right? Even though they're good traits. And next module, we'll talk about the shadows, and we'll come back to this diagram, the tree of traits, in the next module as well. But anytime that we find ourselves being all immersed into an unhealthy level, right? Clouded by the manifestation, the demonstration of these traits, we can quickly come back to self-awareness, right? And then through self-awareness, when we practice this enough, we develop emotional intelligence. And I'll talk a little bit more about that after this presentation of the diagram here, but what we are doing with emotional intelligence is we are understanding our emotions, understanding our traits, and I'll describe for you the difference between traits and emotions, right? The traits are lasting. That's kind of like the core of who you are. And emotions are fleeting, right? And so the emotions will come and go, but the traits are here to stay. And so when we practice self-awareness, we then become aware and knowledgeable of our emotions, because instead of us following them and getting wrapped up into them, which would be emotional unintelligence, we cultivate emotional intelligence because we are learning to follow our traits, which will then show us, perhaps why our emotions are the way that they are, and when they're off center, when it don't feel right, when we're not at peace, remember the path back home is through self-awareness, right? Through inner peace. And so when we practice this, when we do this enough, and it's not going to take very long, we do this a couple of times and we are becoming intelligent emotionally. And then once we develop this emotional intelligence, we are actually becoming more authentic than ever before. Because we're not just being taken captive by these emotions such as anger or rage or jealousy, which come by. We are able to recognize them and just let them pass on through. And so then we behave, we act, and we think like we were made to think, act, and behave. We can be our true, authentic selves. Remember, we're letting go of who others think we should be, letting go of who we think we should be, and instead embracing who we really are. That's authenticity. Now, when you're practicing this, I've placed creativity up at the top in the middle of the balance column. Here's why. Creativity, like I mentioned earlier, can emerge on the shadow side and in active addiction, and it can help us to get what we want, but typically it's not going to be the best thing if we're using it to maintain that addiction, or actually being used by that addiction to maintain us in addiction. So creativity can display itself in poor connotations and in the shadows, but we're not going to do that anymore. We will follow the tree of traits, right? And we will be able to use our trait of creativity now for a much more positive outcome. And so if you'll notice at the top of the balance column, of course, you've got creativity, and notice those two arrows that branch off of creativity. One goes back into the grit column and the other goes back into the grace column. Here's why. So let's say that we have found ourselves off course, out of whack, off center. We realize it, we recognize it, we pause, meditate, or become mindful of the moment, become aware of ourselves. And when we do this, we are cultivating emotional intelligence, which allows us to be our true selves. And then that trait of creativity can then be used to go back into those areas in our lives and not only maintain stability and balance, but begin to show us what we can do in as far as professionally, in our careers, vocationally, in terms of how we further branch out. And it can also be applicable to relationships, right? We now, through the practice of self-awareness and emotional intelligence and being our true selves, we can go back and revisit these traits and bring some innovative solutions into those areas in our lives. Let's look at the first one on empathy, the first one on the grace column, on the right-hand side. And so let's say we're functioning as healthy, balanced, centered, good people in recovery, right? And we're working the trait tree well. We are being able to catch when we're drifting, when we are angry, when we are sad, and we've brought it back together through self-awareness and through emotional intelligence. And now we can use our creativity to revisit perhaps that relationship that had begun to grow toxic with someone, and reevaluate that through the lens of creativity, allowing us to look at how our trait of empathy, right, connecting to others, understanding others, can be used in a more healthy way. So let's say that we're dating someone, that we're in a relationship, And the person that we're in a relationship with, I mean, they really have a hard life. They really face some difficulties, and they're sweet as pie. Some would say they're precious people with big hearts, but they're just facing an uphill battle. And maybe it is an uphill battle of that means life or death. And we never want to be cold or distant. And so all of us being empathetic people, we're going to connect well to that person's plight, to their journey, to their struggle. And it's a good thing. We never want to de-emphasize empathy or reduce the trait of empathy. That's not what we want to do. But if we're not careful, if we're not self-aware, what we tend to do, and I'll keep going back to me, what I can tend to do is become so empathetic to the pain and the suffering of someone I love that when I perceive anything else or anyone else in the slightest way mistreating or mishandling or just life being unfair to that person, I honestly feel like it affects me more than them sometimes, because I am so committed to them and empathetic and love them, right? That if anything bad happens, that's going to become my world to make sure that I alleviate the suffering for that person, which is not a bad motivation at all, right? Not at all. But if we're not careful, we will lose our footing from the place of balance. And that, my friends, is when we can get in trouble. And so I'll use my life as an open book again. I love my wife, Amanda, very, very much. And she has experienced some difficulties, some injustices at work. And I was fit to be tied, as some would say. I was able to empathize with her, but I have at times over the past few years allowed that trait of empathy to grow beyond being empathetic to where it could almost linger upon or grow into resentment or anger, frustration. The trait of empathy is reflective of love. And love will defend, love will protect, love will lead, and love will guide. Now, those are all noble and honorable traits or dimensions of empathy. But if we're not careful, we can easily lose ourselves to where that would become everything. And I remember that I was so saturated in this injustice that had happened to my wife that I had a hard time with it. It brought up some of those raw emotions that I didn't like. I was familiar with when they were present in active addiction, and they didn't go away in active addiction. I'm talking about these traits of empathy and determination. We've already covered that, but what I began to feel was anger and bitterness, and it was toxic, and I knew it. And so what I was able to do is come back home, so to speak, through self-awareness, but it wasn't a one-time and we're done forever tactic. I have worn out this path from empathy to self-awareness so much that if I drew this on paper, there would be a trench or a hole, a line dug out in the paper from empathy to self-awareness, showing that I had used that or erred on that side of balance far too often or very, very much. And so I hope that this is starting to somewhat make some sense. We're going to keep coming back to this, but this is a pathway. This is a map, right? And so we're gonna stay here just a minute and talk about this some more. But we are beginning to see that anytime we get off course or off center, we can come back through self awareness, right? And so the other traits that we could potentially that are potential pitfalls, for example, would be resilience, right? And so determination is determined to get something done, and then resilience is getting back up when you've been knocked down, getting back up when you've been knocked down. A great trait. Organizations aspire to have leaders who are resilient. Resiliency is a hallmark trait of people in recovery. We keep getting back up when we get knocked down. Now, here's the shadow of resilience for me. I have learned recently that sometimes rejection is protection. So when we want something pretty bad and we try to get it and we don't succeed in getting it, we actually get pushed away, denied, or shut down. What you're going to do, what I do habitually, is get back up and go at it again, right? And so there was a position, I'll use work as a reference tool here, or a source. And so there was a position that I had worked for years. If you talk about it collectively, like I'm always trying to get ahead and to advance, which speaks to some deep psychological issues, right? That in terms of acceptance of, again, the competition, the trying to make myself known as being the youngest of four boys. And so anyway, it's a beautiful trait. You all have it. The trait is fine, but we can get it out of balance, right? And so with the position, I wanted it, strive for it, thought that I needed it. And when I didn't get it, of course, I was very upset. But it occurred to me on one day, and I was actually talking with a friend, and I was explaining the situation at work and why I felt like I was looked over for this promotion. And, my supervisors or upper administration didn't see the obvious talent that I had. But anyway, right, self aggrandizement, I believe is what that would be known as. But anyway, I was talking to a friend. I didn't get the position. I felt like I was looked over. And my friend, she said something very, very important. She actually asked me a question. She said, "Jason, do you not trust the universe enough that it will send to you what you need? That you simply have to receive it. You don't have to fight for it." And of course, there's things in life we do have to fight for. But I was in a place where I was trying to control all the variables, control all the conditions, control the environment. And it was not good. It led me to just a bad place, right? And so through that learning experience, I was able to approach life with a different mindset. And so now what I'll do is, and I have to remind myself, and I remind myself through self-awareness, that I simply receive what the universe or God is sending into my life. It's an entirely different approach, right? I've always, for most of my life, felt like I had to make things happen. If I didn't fight for it, if I didn't earn it, if I wasn't the first there and the last to leave, then it wouldn't work out for me. I wouldn't get what I wanted or what I deserved. Man, all that is exhausting. And so, this particular scenario, I realized that I was using my trait of resilience, but it had me wound up so tight and in a bad place to where I thought everybody thought it was a conspiracy, right? To where I didn't get the position I wanted. And it turns out that there was a much better position waiting for me. And if I had gotten the position that I wanted, I would have been constrained and confined within an office, within a location, and I would not be able to do the things that I'm doing today. So that's a life lesson, a universal lesson, right? That we receive. We don't have to make things happen because things are transitory. Everything is always changing. And when we're trying to branch out and control what makes us happy, we're going to fall flat on our face. And when we surrender the outcome, that's the most important thing in this, surrendering the outcome, coming back to the place of centeredness and balance, then we have a healthy outlook, a healthy mindset, and a sense of well-being. So I hope you can see perhaps maybe how you have detoured down one of these columns and hitting it too hard to where you get wrapped up in that aspect of yourself and you forget to come back to center. And so at any one of these traits, any one of them, 3 on the right in grace, 3 on the left in grit, whenever you realize that you are lost in one of these areas, remember, as soon as you realize it, or as soon as someone else points out to you that you've lost your way, like Amanda did with me, we can pause. And even if you're in a classroom or an office or the grocery store, you can close your eyes for just maybe 5 seconds. Take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Maybe do that 3 times. And then this has been helpful for me, and maybe it'll be helpful for you. This is just a little saying. If you like it, write it down. Remember it. If you don't like it, don't worry about it. Come up with something else. But for me, let's say I realize that I'm hitting determination too hard. I'm caught up in it. I'm made to be a determined person, or I am a determined person, but I can go head over heels in it, and it's not healthy. When I realize that, I can come back and I'll say this prayer, this saying. I will say, I realize that I am out of alignment with my presence. I realize I am out of alignment with my presence. I choose peace instead of this. That's the saying. That's the saying. I realize that I am out of touch or out of balance with my presence, and I choose peace instead of this. And what I'm saying through this prayer, and it could be a silent prayer or spoken out loud, what I'm saying is that I'm no longer living from my authentic self. From my authentic self, from the place of the universal spirit, right? I somehow have gotten lost. I've gotten wrapped up in either empathy or resiliency, even appreciation, right? Can get us wrapped up to where, and that's usually reflective of just very low self-confidence, right? And to where we think that everybody has to approve of us in order for us to be validated in our self-worth, right? That's another way that appreciation can go wrong. But when you recognize that, say, I realize that I'm out of alignment with my presence, or you can say balance. I realize I'm out of balance with my presence, and I always say I'll choose peace instead of this. Because for me, my traits usually are over in the grit column, and if before long, I'll be a tad bit angry, maybe, or upset or frustrated. It happens to where even when I would be in traffic and realizing that the person in front of me is going too slow or not using their turn signal, which it seems like they're making cars without turn signals nowadays. Anyway, when I realize that I'm frustrated, I'll quickly say, okay, pause, breathe in, breathe out. So I realize that I'm out of connection or out of alignment or out of balance with my presence. I choose peace instead of this. And the same goes for any of these other traits, right? You can substitute the word peace for love, and so on and so forth. Make your own statement, but have a little, it's kind of like a reminder bell. It's that bell or that alarm that goes off, right? That pulls you back to alignment, to the place of centeredness. And this is solid leadership. This is solid recovery, right? They're both going hand in hand. And then through that practice of self-awareness, we begin to cultivate emotional intelligence, right? And then, and I believe we're going to have to talk about this a little bit more later in the module, but exactly how we express that trait of creativity to further enhance our existing traits, right? We look back, and so through the practice of self-awareness and emotional intelligence and authenticity, we can then assess and look back at other areas in our life and see what improvements can be made, what we can do better to stay in the middle, right? To stay balanced and connected. And then also we can, with creativity, perhaps find some career paths, some entrepreneurial opportunities in one of these spheres that are known or marked by our traits. And so we're going to talk, of course, more about that later in the curriculum, in the model, but there's career paths that branch out from each of these traits. This is so profound and so very, very exciting. And so I hope this provides for you some type of framework or pathway for how you can navigate life, for how you can manage your emotions, how you can regulate your emotions, how you can catch when you've gotten off track, and how you can quickly come back on track. And then not only return to normalcy or standardization or the routine, but when you do that, you transcend, and up through creativity, you then become aware of how you can amplify those other traits to serve you even better, and to serve your community even better, and to serve others even better. So remember, there's always a path back home, and anytime we've lost our way and get off track, we can realize that we are out of alignment with our presence, right? Our presence in the present moment. Realize we are out of balance, coming back to presence, choosing peace instead of this, and then transcending up, and then being able to see our entire life, every characteristic about us, our goals that we want to establish, and we can learn how to use all of these traits, all of ourselves, in a much more healthy fashion that will benefit not only our recovery journey, but everyone else around.